Welcome back, Mike. Are you ready to unpack another book?
I am. Mentioned to you previously before we hit record. I've been traveling quite a bit, and I sent you a message while I was in Boise recording videos for a course that I'm getting ready to release. So I don't have a link for anybody yet, but it's on the Creativity Flywheel if you're into that concept. But I was sitting in the coffee shop across from the studio before the studio opened, before I was going to go record the videos, and I was reading this book and taking my notes and sent you a message that this may be a record for the highest number of action items. I'm basically making up for all of the books in the last couple months where I haven't had action items. They're all part of this one.
What I can tell you folks is looking at our notes document, Mike's action item list is extensive, right? Like it is extensive. There may not have been a book that was like that you're the target audience for that's more on spot than this one. I don't know how to say that
Yeah,
in a
that's
better way,
fair.
but do you know what I mean? I'm reading
Yep.
this book thinking this was written for Mike. This section was written for Mike. Hey, oh, this section was written for Mike. Like, so I don't know. Did you know of Jenny Blake before reading this?
Before reading it, no. So I have trouble. I'm hesitating answering that because the story behind this book is that I bought this when it came out a couple of years ago, I think, or at least I bought it a couple of years ago. But then I went to Sean Blanc's Focus Like a Boss session in Kansas City. And Sean, when he does live events, he does them right. So what he did for everybody who came is he put together these gift bags. And in there was this fancy Ugmonk pen, which is now one of my favorite pens, a notebook with your name on it. And one of the things that he put in that gift bag, because he knows Jenny, was a signed copy of the book. So mine actually has a personalized note on the inside of it. And I had bought the book years before, right? So then when I got this book, I was like, oh, I have that one. And then I opened it. Oh, this is really cool. And then that got me thinking, as I was poking around it, I'm like, why haven't I read this yet?
Yeah. Yeah. This seems like one of those books that 2 years ago, Mike, would have been like gold mine, and then now Mike is still gonna get like a ton of value out of it. Although it might be one of those ones where the experience of your last 2 years has really like allowed you to reflect well on things you could adjust. So that would be
Right. Yeah.
it's gonna be interesting to hear. But before we do that, we're putting the cart before the horse. Let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about follow up from last week. So I'll start. My follow up was to rethink interruptions, and I'll tell you what, like if I'm rating this on a red is fail, yellow is mediocre, orange is mediocre, and then green is good, I'm going to say I'm between like yellow, orange, and green. And in particular, where I wanted this to happen, and I don't know if I expressed it well enough on the last episode, but like where I really wanted this to happen was with my kids. Like I didn't want my kids to come in and me to think of that as like this major interruption in my day.
Yeah.
And I think I've done a better job at that. That it's like, nope, like come on, little child, like let's engage. It's only gonna take me 5 or 10 minutes. I probably wasn't doing anything that important anyhow, even though I thought I was doing something important. Reality is, I probably was just reading a book for a bookworm, or looking at some silly thing on the internet. So
Those two
it's
things
okay.
are not equal, by the way.
They are not equal, but I'm just saying neither of them are as important as my children, right? Like, so my
That's
children
fair.
are
That's
on a
fair.
much higher scale or higher level than that. So it's like I think I've done a pretty good job of that. I would rate this one between a orangey or yellow and a green. How about you? You had two.
Yeah. So the one that I think I did fairly well on was paying myself first with my time. I think I shared. It's been a bit, but um, I mentioned that I had this vision for what this would look like, where I would go to the co-working space at the beginning of the day and I would do the deep work, the writing, the creative work there. And then after that, I would come home, and that would be when I typically would be recording, or when I would be doing admin type stuff. And I can say that when I have been here, this has worked fairly well.
Okay.
I think I've been able to make traction on it, although I haven't had 100% control over my schedule. for example, we're recording this on a Wednesday morning, which is totally fine. But I have other people that I record podcasts with, so it's not completely up to me. I recorded Focused yesterday morning, so that's two of my my 5 mornings now that have been interrupted per se. But for the most part, I feel like this is working. And then I've also been traveling, so there have been days where this was just not even an option because I was at a conference and then I was recording videos. So that is what it is. But I like this, and I want to keep this going. I feel like I'm still at the point where there's some holes that I have to fill. I feel a sense of urgency for some of the Life HQ stuff and the ancillary things around it, like the Creativity Flywheel course, the Practical PKM, or the PKM Stack course. But once those are done, I know there's always going to be a list, but I feel like once those are done, I can kind of see how the system is going to work. And at that point, I can, at a less hurried pace, just pick the next thing to fix, tweak it, etc. So
let me interrupt for a second. What is so considering you're paying yourself with your time, do you have a planned not going to go crazy period of time in the next 3-4 months? Like not going to work on like a fairly major thing, because you released Life HQ. Now you're doing these 2 courses, and you're going hard on these 2 courses.
And we've got the Life Theme cohort going. Yeah.
Are you going to give yourself a little bit of like breathing room, to like let those creative juices like re-engage?
Yes, but probably not until end of December.
Okay.
So the plan is to take 2 weeks off around Christmas and New Year's. I will be in Door County over Thanksgiving. However, the reason I'm kind of hustling with these courses is I want them to be part of a Black Friday, Cyber Monday promotion. I feel like Black Friday, Cyber Monday maybe has gotten a bad rap, but it's really important for creators. And you don't have to just like spam people with a bunch of offers for stuff that they just bought at a lower price and make them feel bad. There's ways that you can do it where it's legit. So I've got a plan for that. And that's got to happen. So yeah, it's coming. And then starting next year, I want to regularly take I'm calling them sabbaticals. It's not probably what you're thinking of in terms of sabbaticals, because it's not, I'm taking a whole semester off, but every 8th week, basically, I want to have nothing scheduled.
Oh, nice.
And that's part of the strategy going into 2025.
Very nice. Very nice.
All right. The other action item I had was to recognize the bad things that happened as stories. I have thought about this action item several times. I don't think I've had bad things happen to me. All that to say, I have not captured any bad things as stories. I've captured a couple of stories, but not many. So this Homework for Life, going back to the Story-Worthy episode with Matthew Dix, I still think this is valuable, and I want to continue to think about how to do this, but it's not gaining the traction yet. And that's partly, I think, just because I've been running around like a chicken with my head cut off.
Yeah. Like real quick, right? Try not to. Wow, like you've been traveling a lot. Like in the last 2 weeks. I mean, you've been traveling. I would say 10 or no, maybe not that long. 10 out of 14 days. 7 out of 14 days.
It's been a bit. So at the end of October, we were in Tennessee for the National Homeschool Soccer Tournament, which was pretty cool. There's like 70 teams there from 36 different states, I think. That was a pretty neat experience. Then we got back Sunday night from that, and Monday morning I went to Boise to record PKM Stack videos. Came back, I think, on Wednesday. Thursday we had our big outreach, and then the next week I left Monday to go back to Boise and recorded Creativity Flywheel courses, went to the conference, got back Saturday. And it's been a bit of a blur.
Yeah. Well, good. I mean, it sounds like you're doing awesome stuff. So keep it up. Are you ready to move on to our book?
Let's do it.
All right. So our book today is by Jenny Blake, as we talked about before. It's called Free Time, Lose the Busy Work, Love Your Business. Jenny Blake was at Google, moved up fairly quickly, and then realized that she was not thriving. Decided that, and this is all part of the kind of the backstory of the book that you learn if you read it. But learned that she wasn't thriving. She wanted to kind of start her own thing and kind of move out into her own consulting business, her own coaching, speaking kind of business. Takes that on, and then she's written Pivot, and that was I believe that was her first book. Am I right, Mike? Pivot was her first one.
I think there was another one before that,
yeah,
but Pivot was
College.
the last one before Free Time, and that's where the majority of the references to her previous work came from.
Yeah, there's one about college, something about college. I can't remember what it is, but so and then you have Pivot, and then you have this book. So let's just move right into it. The introduction, right? So we're gonna break this book into kind of introduction. We're gonna outline her framework. Then she has 3 different parts to the book: so align, design, and assign. Conclusion, and then we'll wrap it up. So let's start with the introduction. She basically starts out with this backstory of like, I kind of was in burn it all down mode. Like I kind of was in this idea of, I'm freaking out. There's all this stress, all of these things. One of the things she gets into very, very quickly, which Mike and I'm going to speak for you, Mike, and correct me if I'm wrong. Mike and I resonate with this very, very much. She is a very devout systems thinker, and she's a very devout systems person, which resonates with me more than I can explain. And I know, Mike, in your operations side of your world, I'm sure that resonates with you as well. So the introduction is really about like these ideas of kind of where I was coming from and wrong way of thinking, and then she introduces what she calls heart-based business, which is like her business strategy framework and her like am I wrong to say it's her coaching side, Mike? Like I mean, like that's kind of what she coaches folks in, is this heart-based business.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what she does, to be honest, but I think this book is really about the mechanics of how the business works. So I actually appreciate the fact that she didn't go super deep into that. But the heart-based business, essentially the key question from that section of the introduction is, how can we earn twice as much in half the time with ease and joy while serving the highest good? And that is a mouthful. There's like 4 different components in there. Obviously, the profit and revenue. We want to earn twice as much. We want to be efficient, so half the time. With ease and joy, how do we make it fun while serving the highest good? Connecting to our vision and our values is how I would frame that. But it's not just a business in order to make money, is the
Yep.
big takeaway here at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think she does a really good job shooting down, for lack of a better way to word it, these existing or past ideas of what it meant to run a business, right? So you run your own company, hard work no longer directly correlates to this idea of hard work, hustle, that entrepreneurial kind of bent toward it. She talks about,
which, by the way, let
okay,
me just double click on that for a second. If that was the only revelation I got from this book, it was worth it. But I recognize that I often will tackle hard projects because I believe that there will be something good that comes from these hard projects. And she's basically blowing that up right at the beginning.
Yes.
By saying that it has nothing to do with how hard you work. Like no one owes you anything. It's really about the value that you're able to deliver to the marketplace, which when you think about it makes total sense. But that was kind of a pivot or a shift in my thinking right from the beginning of this book, which I was very appreciative of.
And later on, we're going to talk about the fact she actually tells you it's the opposite of that. Like you essentially want to do the easiest work that adds the most value. And if you're not doing the easy, like you need to make it easier, like figure out a system to make it easier, which is really, really like a different way to think about business. And then especially the CEO or the operation side of it. She talks another one of these things she's going to address directly, or she like calls out in this very introduction, the hungry ghosts of money, fame, power, and control. She calls them the 4 horsemen of the business ambition apocalypse, which I just like the way she framed that. I was like, oh yeah, like why do we do this? Well, we're chasing money, we're chasing fame, we're chasing power, we're chasing control. She calls that out as a bad way to do it. And then basically she says that forward, like moving forward with your business, is not some financial threshold or some vanity, which we see all over the place, right? Like, I mean, if you watch YouTube for 4 minutes, you're going to figure out somebody's telling you to chase this financial goal or chase this vanity metric. That it's peace, harmony, progress towards a larger mission, abundant cash flow. So she does acknowledge, hey, if you're going to run a business, like, you actually need to make revenue. You actually need to make profit. You actually need to have a cash flow. She's not like hippy dippy in a way that it's like, oh, it's just all feeling good and everything like that. Like, she's very, very logical about it at the same time as saying, but it's also not all these vanity metrics. It's not also all of these things that really don't matter. Like, you got to think about the bigger picture. And it clearly comes out of her idea that when she was in Google, she was stressed out of her mind and wasn't thriving, according to her. Like, she was not thriving by any means. This is probably, like, in this introduction is probably where I realized I may not be the ideal audience for this book, just as much as I realized you are the ideal audience. So, like, we could not be on further sides of the spectrum, because it's like, I am working a standard jobby job, right?
Yeah.
Although what I will say is maybe I lean a little bit your way in terms of, like, as a faculty member, I do have a lot of autonomy, like a lot of autonomy in the way things get done and in, like, the work that I take on any given day. There are some things where it's like, okay, I just have to do this because this is part of the job, but I have a lot of autonomy when it comes to it. You have all the autonomy, right? Like, I mean, there is,
I've got it all. Yeah.
if you wake up and say, I'm not doing it today, you're not doing it that day, right? Like, I mean, nobody's going to tell you to do it. So this is maybe where I saw a disconnect from my side, but I saw a strong connection to your side.
Yeah. Thank you for picking this book for me.
I think you picked it, didn't you?
Well,
Right?
I suggested it. And when you said, yeah, that looks great, I was kind of like, really? Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know you talk about some of this stuff with your students too, so I'm sure that it will trickle its way down. One of the things that I liked in the introduction here, which we should call out because it's going to pop up a bunch throughout the rest of the book probably, is the delightfully tiny team concept, which, according to her definition, is 3 other part-time people. And later on in the book, she talks about why it's capped at that number, because if you go beyond that exponentially, and the number of connections between the different people in the organization increases, and things just get way more complex. She talks about later on in the book about the integrator versus visionary, which, I mean, I was an integrator, so maybe we chat about that a little bit later. But the big takeaway from this, I think, at the beginning here is that you don't have to just scale, which I think was kind of the prevailing message, especially on social media, like the hustle bros and the hashtag startups, founder mode, all that kind of stuff, is just get as big as you can, as fast as you can. And she's basically saying, maybe don't. Maybe just find a small business that makes you a good amount of money and doesn't completely stress you out, and live that life, because it's awesome, which I appreciate. This is a breath of fresh air to a lot of the business books that I've read. Yeah.
And it comes from, like, she's very clear. It comes from experience, which I like, always adds value to me. It's like, she's not just talking theoretical here. She's talking like, this is the life I live. I've lived this life for like 10 years now, I think is what she said at one point, that she's been in this world for about 10 years. So, all right, let's move to the free time framework, which is the next section. She says free time has a double meaning. As a verb, it's a continual process of freeing your time to do your best work. And then it's a philosophy, reimagining how we work, optimizing freedom and values, instead of orienting toward money and growth at the expense of time and health. So that's how she categorizes free time, which I appreciated that she did this early, and she didn't make us wait until 3/4 of the way through the book to then tell us what she meant by free time. So she's calling it a verb and a philosophy. One of the key points that she brings up in here is this idea of friction, and that you can have different ways that friction arises. So she calls out, and I'm not going to go into like the details of how she describes it, but she calls out pressure, prices, and then porous boundaries as these ways that friction can arise, and these friction points can arise. I really like that. She ties into your, what you've taught for a while, that basically your values drive a lot of things. Right. But then she adds in to energy and your strengths into that as well. Right. So and that's kind of before optimizing the project. So she's laying out this free time framework of how do we do this? How do we set this up to, again, lose busyness and add value?
Yeah, I really like this framework. She's got one of these circles: align, design, assign, and then there's 3 different things underneath each one of those, which lays the framework for the rest of the book. I like the 3 common points of friction. You mentioned pressure, prices, and porous boundaries. Specifically, prices that are too low,
Yep.
which is something that I struggle with. There's lots of people who tell me that I need to charge more for things. Just as an example, I mentioned the rite of passage cohort that I just wrapped up in the pro show. The list price of that was $4,000 for a single cohort. I am charging $500 for a year's membership to my community, which includes 4 cohorts.
Yep.
So part of that is just the imposter syndrome and trying to figure this stuff out. If I really, felt confident I could deliver $4,000 worth of value, then I should do that. But the bottom line is that I tend to price things fairly low, according to some of my business friends anyways. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about here, getting into like the missing metrics stuff, there was a statistic where there are 31.7 million small businesses in the US. The definition of a small business is under 500 employees. So that feels like, well, I'm a solopreneur. My business must be microscopic compared to most of the other businesses that are out there. And then she said that of those 31.7 million small businesses, 25 million of them have no employees. They are non-employer businesses. That was interesting to me because one of the people that I follow online is Justin Welsh, and his whole thing is like solopreneurship. And it really made me realize that is a viable path. Now, Delightfully Tiny Teams, she's not advocating that you stay a solopreneur forever, but the big takeaway here is that you don't have to be huge. Also interesting to me with this is that over 50 million people consider themselves content creators, which is the fastest growing small business segment, which it would be interesting, a couple years later to see how these concepts that she's talking about have been applied by those creators. I don't know anyone who would write a book that niche necessarily, but it's interesting to me. There's 31.7 million small businesses. A lot of those have no employees, but then there's a higher number of the people who consider themselves to be content creators. And I think if you're going to do content creation, even as like a side hustle, you're maybe in a position where you're going to start a business. So that just is that math is interesting to me. Like I expect that 31.7 million small businesses to go up considerably in the near future. The percentage that have no employees to go up as well. And the real question I have is just how much is it going to go up? How many of those 50 million people who consider themselves to be content creators are going to be brave enough to take the leap? But I think for the people who do, the framework that she's outlining here is amazing. It's perfect. It's what you need. And the metric that is important to pay attention to is not how much money you make. I mean, you need to pay attention to how much money you make, especially at the beginning, because regardless of how hard you work, you have bills that you need to pay. But the metric she talks about is your time to revenue ratio. Basically, how much are you making for the hours that you are investing in the different activities in your business? So the things that are a high return on investment, do more of that. Delegate the other stuff that's not a great investment, which when she explains it, you're kind of like, yeah, duh. Why haven't I done that yet?
So had you ever heard of that metric before?
No, not that one. I've heard of the concept. It's something that I've tried to keep in mind, but I haven't had a formal way to measure it. I still don't think I have a real great formal way to measure this. The way she describes to do it is to divide your company revenue by 1,000, divide that figure by the number of hours worked in that time period, and then multiply that by 100 to yield a percentage. So I don't really see how that is necessarily all that valuable. But one of the things I pay attention to in my personal retreat framework every single quarter is what's working and what's not working. So just by asking those questions, I feel like I'm getting the 80-20 of this, but an argument could be made that I should be tracking that number specifically.
So I don't know if you listen to Cortex or not, but like I listened to that in CGP Grey, and I don't know if he got this from Blake or not, but it was a couple years ago. He's super big into time tracking, and it's because he's doing this, right? Like he's 100% doing the time to revenue or time to profit ratio. He just never called it this. Like he never described it as this way, but that was the first thing I thought of. Is I was like, oh, this is what Gray described like a long time ago. Is how he does this for every video, and then the different parts of his videos, and why he actually cares about time tracking. The other
Yep.
one I want to call out in this section is she spends approximately $1,500 per month on software to achieve greater efficiency. Now, if this was a company, like a big, it's like that's nothing. That's a drop in the bucket. Like we spend, we've got these contracts that cost, whatever they cost. I just can't even fathom this as a me, right? Like as a person who's
Yeah.
doing the work, spending that much money per month on software. But I don't know, like Mike, did that number shock you, or is that number like reasonable?
That number is pretty reasonable, I think.
Is it? Okay.
I do think it is definitely a mental hurdle to get over, especially for a solopreneur.
Yeah.
But I've seen how much you can spend on software in your business. I know how much business software costs.
Yes.
So you have a couple different recurring costs, and it quickly approaches that number even with a tiny team. However, I think my thinking around this was shifted a little bit as she went on, because I started to think of these things that I wanted to do in the business, some of the things that she was talking about in the stories that she was sharing. And it's something that I've known that I should do for a long time, like having feedback forms. How much is that actually costing me to not have a feedback form? But the reason I don't have a feedback form is because every time I think about, well, I need to add this to the library, for example, so people can share their feedback, what they like, what they don't like, and I can improve the programming and the community over time. I go and I look at the software that's available, and I see Typeform, and it's $50 a month. And I'm like, $50 a month for a form?
Yeah.
But really, if I got even one or two insights every
Yeah.
single month, that's more valuable than the $50 a month. So you have to get over the sticker shock. And also you have to be very clear on what are the important things that you need to do in your business. Because I think there's a lot of business software that's like, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could do this thing that you never really thought about before? Oh yeah, that might be cool. Well, that's only $200 a month. And then you sign up for the free trial and you forget to cancel. So I think she does a great job of kind of identifying the critical activities and the things that you should be paying attention to. And then you want to solve for those problems, not discover new problems. Like those new problems are always out there if you look for them, but focus on the stuff that really matters. I think a lot of business owners, myself included, I think to some degree, they think that the problems in their business are because they don't have the right information. They're looking for some new tool, some new system, some new framework that's just going to solve things for them. And I see this in personal productivity as well. It's like GTD and all these different things. It's like, that's the thing. I'm going to do that, and it's going to make everything easy. And it's not the case. You got to figure out what are the key elements to add to the system that I'm currently using, and you tweak things. And maybe there are some things, you never really considered having a feedback form, or you never paid attention to Net Promoter Score, and you have to build that from scratch. But most small businesses, I think, that have been around for a little while, they've got a lot of the key components in place. Otherwise, they wouldn't be around for a while.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They would disappear. So I think that's the TLDR here, is to get clear on the critical activities, and use money, use tools, like pay monthly for software that will solve those things, but don't chase the shiny new objects.
All right, so we're going to move into align, design, and assign. So that's part 1, part 2, and part 3 of the book. Let's go to align first. Align encompasses how many of these chapters? So it's the first 9 chapters of the book. The book has like 27 or something like that chapters overall. So the first third of the book comes in
So
here.
by the way, the frame, the setup for the rest of this book, there's 3 parts. Each part has 3 sections. Each section has 3 chapters.
Yep.
It's
very
very
threes.
symmetrical.
Yes. So in the align section, right, she's going to say you need to align your business with three core elements. You need to align it based on values. You need to align it based on the energy, about, like whether it drains you or whether it gives you energy. And then you need to align it based on the strengths. So your biggest strengths in the business, what sets you apart. And then she's going to break down the chapters in the following way. Mike, I think the best way to do this is not going to be go chapter by chapter, right? But it's just going to be talk about the key ideas that we called out. So we may want to just back and forth this, just to kind of give us a good flow. I'll start out with the first one I have. She talks about Annie Murphy Paul. So she references the extended mind, and basically saying that Annie describes how the habit of continuous offloading clears space for making fresh observations and synthesizing. This idea that basically we need to offload the details of things into systems that are going to then retain that for us, to where we don't have to constantly have that in our brain. Now, I can't remember in her book if she gets into the manager manual this early, but the manager manual is something she's going to talk about.
Oh, she does. Yeah, actually, she does in chapter 2.
Yeah. So the manager manual is going to be something she talks about throughout the book, which this is like, she calls out these different things. Essentially, she says, oh, okay, if this is something we had to think about, or this is a problem we have to solve, document it somewhere, right? It might be in the manager manual. It might be in these onboarding procedures. It might be in whatever it is. But she's like, get that out of your mind, get it onto something. All I can tell you is, Mike, if I did this alone with my job, like next year would be so much smoother. It'd be so much cleaner. And I tell myself this all the time. It's like, you need to document that somewhere. You need to document that somewhere. You need to document that somewhere. I'm just not good at it. Like, I'm not consistent at documenting it somewhere. But there are things that I know that if I got that out of my mind and just said, oh, just go look here, like when that arises again. So I really need to do like an SOP, like standard operating procedure for my job and or the school kind of a thing. I think that would help out a lot.
Yeah, the operating principles document was one of my action items. That's different than the manager manual, by the way. But the operating principles reminds me of the life theme cohort we started this week. One of the stories that we tell in there, my wife and I, is that when we were thinking about when our kids were still young, we got away overnight, and the next morning we went to a coffee shop. And I wanted to call it Schmidt's Family Standard Operating Procedures, but she wouldn't let me. So we ended up on something like Guiding Principles. And it was basically the vision of what we wanted our family to look like when our kids got to be teenagers. So it's kind of where we're at. We wanted to have the platform to speak into their lives as they're going through the hard things and trying to make the difficult decisions on their own. And then we thought about, what are the habits and the routines that we need to identify? Like, if we do these consistently, it's going to build that platform. One of those things is a weekly one-on-one. I just got back from mine today with Joshua, my 14-year-old. And we just get coffee, play games, talk about whatever they want to talk about. I rotate the kid every week. We also brought in the Schmidt's Family core values. We've got our life themes, all that kind of stuff, and it kind of all aligns. So I understand the importance of this. I've even applied it personally to my family. I have not gone back and applied it to my own individual creator business, yep. Which is a theme, which is why there are so many action items here. There's no way I'm getting through all these action items, by the way, by next time. But this is basically, these are going into my Obsidian task database, and I'm going to slowly start building these out. So yeah, I think the manager manual, the operating principles, these are all really important. And it's not something that you really think about in the moment. You're just like, oh, I just need to solve this problem. Someone needs this information, so I'll just send it to them. And she starts with a story about she's visiting somebody and she has to text them and ask for the Wi-Fi password. And then she frames it as, how about I help you put together this document for the next time that you have guests come over? And I was like, that's brilliant.
Yep. And you could tell this is like embedded in her being, right? Like she's like, I'm just going to make this document for you, and it's going to help you out.
Yep. I mean, there's so much in here. It's all so good. There are different avenues of that she talks about. I think she does a really good job of completing the picture. So it's not just here's one area. She really, like, one of the things that came up in chapter 2 is to put together the brand style guide. Like, I never really even thought about that before, but it's like, well, yeah, if I'm going to start delegating, I should have a style guide. These are the colors, these are the fonts, these are the logo files. That makes it easier for anybody else
Mm-hmm.
to make any sort of assets, whether they be, title banners for workshops inside the community or social media posts. Like, of course, I should be putting that stuff together. She talks about creating a gifting database. I mean, there's so much stuff that is in here, but I think the thing that I really want to mention from this section comes from chapter 8, which is the whole idea of the bottleneck effect, where one broken piece can prevent or delay all your progress. As the owner of the business, you are the bottleneck, she says later on. I'm totally the bottleneck for a lot of different things. So on the one hand, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I really suck. But on the other hand, it's identifying the places where things can be improved. She mentions that back in the previous section about friction versus flow. Flow is the good one. That's where you want to be, where you're focusing on a vital few projects or clients. But friction is the disharmony, which is producing the resistance. And so a lot of people view friction as, well, that's got to be eliminated. We got to get rid of that as quickly as possible. And there's some truth to that. But she kind of frames it interestingly, where friction indicates an opportunity. So that's a positive thing. It's an opportunity to transform your business. So making that list of the things that I am the bottleneck for, while it may make me feel bad in the moment, ultimately that I believe that's going to be a long-term significant net gain for the business. So yeah, I'm thinking about bottlenecks and limiting factors and what are my most valuable activities versus my less valuable activities and all that kind of stuff.
Can I pause you there? Because like that was one of the things that really stood out to me, is this idea of most valuable activities. It makes so much sense. And she says the more time the business owner spends on their most valuable activities, I think this is true with any worker in the business.
Yeah.
The more time that person spends on their most valuable activities, because it's most valuable, right? Like it's the most valuable activities to the business. So therefore, if you're really, really good at this thing, that's what you should do, because that's going to be the most valuable to the business. We should try to offload these other things that aren't your skill set, that aren't your interest. And let's find somebody who they're really good at that and they actually like doing it. And let's give that job to them. So I'll give you an example from academia. You see it more now, but you never used to see it before, where you have teaching faculty and you have research faculty, right? Like, so you have teaching faculty who their primary job is to teach, and they might do a little bit of research, but their job is not to research. Then you have research faculty and their primary job is to research, and they might do a little bit of teaching as well. And it's like, it's so much clearer of a system, because like people can do what their strengths are. And if somebody wants to like work a hybrid job, they can figure out a way to work that hybrid job where they do both research and teaching kind of at a 50-50 level. But you're not forcing people, square pegs into round holes anymore. You're giving them this idea. So I love this idea, this most valuable activity, and as it relates to bottleneck.
Yeah, there's a concept from Dan Sullivan called unique ability. And his whole thing is really, if you are a business owner, you want to function in your unique ability. So if you're the visionary, you want to be doing visionary type activities. But then he kind of mentions that the real magic happens in an organization when you hire people who have complementary unique abilities and everyone is able to work in their unique abilities. Another way to say it would be your zone of genius. I mean, this is not a completely original concept. There's lots of ways that people talk about this, but yeah, you want everybody in the right seats doing the right things. And when you can get that, that's when that's when the magic happens.
Yeah. The last one I'll pull out for me on this first aligned section is this idea of golden hours. And golden hours relates back to something she talks about in the introduction, which is this founder time. So in kind of the end of the introduction, she says, hey, you need to dedicate the founder time, and you need to protect that founder time, where you have a calendar block that nobody's allowed to mess with, that nobody, adjusts, nobody schedules over. It's your time to do founder type work, to do business alignment or thinking type work. And then she brings in the idea in chapter 6 about this idea of golden hours, the 1 or 2 times a day that are optimal for your peak energy and creativity, given your unique rhythms and all of those other things. I get an action item out of this that basically says I want to align or try to align. For me, founder time doesn't really work, but it's like this idea of golden hours. Like I want to identify when my golden hours are and say like these are the times when I can do my most productive, best thinking work. And then I want to align it with essentially the most important activity that I have. Like I don't know how to say it. Like I'm not really worried about the founder time phrase. It's that most important activity, and how do I align those two things? Because I can tell you that right now I don't do that. Like I can tell you confidently that I don't do that. I probably try to do my most important activities at the absolute worst time I could do that, and that's after the kids go to bed in the evening. You know, like so. So it's like I want to rethink that. So I get an action item out of this first section for sure.
Nice. Yeah, the whole idea of the golden hours, I've heard Chris Bailey define it as like the biological prime time. It's aligning the right things at the right time of the day. That's really powerful. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, though. Sometimes you just got to do the best you can with what you've got to work with. So it's great if you can align that stuff, but don't beat yourself up if you can't.
So do you have anything else from this first section, Mike?
I mean, we could talk for another couple hours about the first section, but I think we should move on to the next one.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the second section. The second section is design. So part 2, she's going to break this down into 3 different sub areas, as Mike described before. So before starting any new project, you'll clearly define 3 areas: the ideal outcomes, the impact, and then the process. And then the chapters are gonna break down through those 3 ideas. So I'll start off with what I thought was a really interesting one coming out of this one. Happens early in the chapter. The Zen saying of "don't push the river," and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this makes like so much sense." You know, it's like there are certain things that you have to identify as, hey, things are just flowing, and they're gonna flow this way, and regardless of what you do, that's the way it's going to be. And I don't mean that in like a get out of jail free card, like don't try to change systems, don't try to do hard work, you know, don't try to like, you know, it's not a scapegoat. But then there are truly times when it's like, all right, this one you're not going to impact right now or as directly as you want it to. How can you swim in that river and still get done what you want to get done, still do the outcomes that you want to do, still have the impact that you want to have, and still run the processes that you want to run within that that river? So I'll give you an example for me. Email as a form of communication. Like I would
hoping
burn
you
it
were
down.
going to bring this up.
Yeah, I would burn it down tomorrow, right? Like I mean, I would just completely erase it from the existence of any way to communicate. But I'm in a world where that is going to stay around, and I have to swim in that river. I just have to figure out how do I swim in that river to where it doesn't completely drain and stress me out. And that's just something I have to do. And that might be too like, I don't know, trivial of an example, but that was the one that came into my head. Of like, hey Cory, this is the river. Just swim in it. Like, don't try to get the university to stop using email because that's not going to happen.
Yeah, she equates the modern equivalent of Sisyphus with never-ending email inboxes in chapter 12. So I don't think that is overstating it at all.
All right, what's one of your big takeaways from this section?
One of my big takeaways, well, there's a bunch of them here, but one of the things I really liked was from chapter 11, where you never have full control over how the work that you do lands in the world. So surrender the outcome. I think this is the important thing when it comes to what we were talking about with the pro show and some of the writing advice. You had asked me, you know, how do you figure out, you know, what is the thing that really is your thing to write about? And I mentioned that you make noise and you listen for signal, but you can't force the results. You can't force people to pay attention to something as much as you would maybe like to sometimes. All you can really do is consistently make stuff and then pay attention. Oh, this one seemed to get a little bit more response than the previous one. Why do I think that is? And I like to do this from a topic level or a content level, not a like subject line or YouTube thumbnail level. Yeah. Although there is some truth to that kind of stuff as well. But I would prefer to think you just make good stuff, and eventually the people will reward you for that with their time and their attention. But from the same section, there's also a whole thing about disagreeing with the traditional advice of setting specific business goals. I'm not sure if I have railed against goals since you joined the podcast.
You may have, yes, you may have once or twice. But go ahead, just do it again. Let's hear it again, Mike.
My friend Bodie has long been encouraging me to be nicer to goals. So for a while I was trying to do that, but I really think that we just have this natural attraction towards goals and specifically SMART goals. They got to be specific, they got to be measurable, they got to be realistic, yada, yada, yada. And I kind of don't like that. But anytime you read a business book, typically they're like, well, you need to have these specific goals. And I get, what they're going after with that, because you have to have a direction. But the problem with goals is that they're binary. You either achieve them or you don't. And she brought up a reference to a book that I had actually read. I forgot. I haven't read it in quite a while, but It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. And that's by the Basecamp guys. But they actually don't have goals for their company. And I actually like that a lot. I think the thing that makes that work is that you have these intentions and you are moving in specific directions for short periods of time. So I think they do like the agile business, the sprint model, and you have all these opportunities then to reassess. But I think that the 80-20 in terms of setting the goals is having the direction. One of the things that she talks about here is that goals force the focus onto milestone metrics, which I don't really like. That was an interesting way of framing that, and I never really realized it or would have been able to articulate it that way before. But yeah, these milestone metrics where once we get to this point, that's when the switch gets flipped from a 0 to a 1, and now the thing is done or better or whatever. But that isn't how things play out in the real world. So don't get caught up in those higher status symbols, the certain number of email subscribers or the $1 million in revenue or anything like that. That's not necessarily strategy. And so I don't have a specific takeaway from this part of the book, but I do like the way that she spoke to the dangers of goals, I guess, and sort of what you should do instead, where you really are just paying attention to the things that work. Come back to the very beginning. She's talking about doing more of the things that produce more revenue in your business. And in this section, she kind of talks about serendipity and you discover those moments where this really worked. Okay, let's shift or let's pivot. Let's do a little bit more of that. I feel like you can be more flexible or agile when you aren't anchored in those goals. This is what we have to do by the end of this quarter or the end of this year, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard you talk about this before from my goal is to run the marathon, right? And then you run the marathon and you're like, well, now what? Versus I'm going to develop the habit of being a runner, right? Like, and there's a very different ways to think about outcomes. It's like, oh, well, I look back on my habit tracking and I've run, 90% of the days in the last 6 months. I've become a runner versus I've run a marathon and, am I a runner or not? And the feeling you have at the end of it. This leads quickly into one of mine from the next section, this impact, where she describes like desiring, basically the highest good for those involved, right? For all of those involved. So you're trying to make the highest good for those involved. So if you produce something that makes the most revenue and it destroyed your team, is that the impact you want to make? If you're producing something that has super low revenue, but your team loved it, is that the impact you kind of want? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not an either or kind of thing. You have to think through what does impact look like, but not just from a business perspective, like a business metric perspective, not just from a team metric perspective, but also from like a external community, a branding, like essentially look at it from all of these different places and say, like, what is the impact that I want to have with this thing that I'm working on right now? And I really just like the way she kind of framed that. And then she gets into like, I'm she quotes Glenn Ross, which I don't know if you know that quote or not, but the always be closing.
Yep.
They're sales guys, so they're always be closing. And she's like, shift this to always be listening. And I was like, oh, well, what a great, like, little shift in that, because it does set up this idea of, like, if you're listening, if you're paying attention to it in the education world, we would call that formative assessment. So your summative assessment is, did you pass the test? Like, did you get the 70 or above on the test that we actually cared about? And your formative assessment is like, every day I'm looking at you in class and I'm saying, you have no idea what you're doing. Or like every day I'm looking at your class, you're like, you need to be 4 steps ahead of where we are. How do I get you in front of everybody else, because you're bored right now. And this ties into that idea of developing habits versus outcomes. Like, I want you to be in the habit in the educational world of being a learner. Like, I want you to learn and give effort and be motivated just by the idea of learning. I don't want you to be motivated because at some point you're going to get an A or a B or a C, in the class, because when you leave here, like, nobody gives you A's and B's and C's anymore. Like, they stop giving you grades when you leave the university. So, but that was a big one for me.
Speaking of when you leave university, another thing that I liked was chapter 14, which is titled Scale, Be Ready for a Big Break. I tend to think the big break is going to be because I worked super hard, as we mentioned in earlier discussion. But one of the things that she mentioned here is that musicians don't get paid by how long it takes to write a song.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, the way she framed that is like, well, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Uh-huh. So again, I don't have a specific action item from this particular section, although I do have lots of action items. But I guess the mindset shift that this has started to put into place for me is, what if you were really successful? What if the thing that you made, people really liked it? I feel like I've gotten, a little bit of a glimpse of what that could look like with Life HQ, which is the launch has gone really well. But I don't want it to just be encapsulated in that one-time event. So I don't know. I feel like I would probably be a lot more energized, a lot more optimistic if I could remember this going forward. But then also this is a reason to pay attention to the systems, because she mentions that if you scale with sloppy systems, your problems are only going to multiply.
Yep.
And there's a quote that she shares from Bill Hewlett, says, more companies die of indigestion than starvation. And I realized the truth in that when I read it. I went back and I started looking at, how much have I made in my business? And if you really are paying attention to the numbers and you know what's coming in and you know what's going out, I think a lot of times in small creator businesses, you might be shocked at the end of the year when you're filing your taxes as an LLC or whatever. I made that much. Where did it all go?
Yeah, where did it all go?
Well, got some sloppy systems and I was paying for this software that I wasn't using and yada, yada, yada. So just being aware of that stuff, making sure that it's tight, because I don't want to, if you've got holes in your pocket, the more that you pour in, the more you're going to lose. So it pays to fix that stuff before the big break happens.
Yeah. You'll, having done this with me multiple times at this point, and I like this section because it's really practical, right? Like, if you just look at the chapter titles, these are like go do, like time blocking and, be ready to scale and, use different language. And like, so these are very like actionable, practical things, which I think if I was in the point of trying to restructure a business or running a business in this way, like I would get a ton out of how do I do this? 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 And almost break it down, by chapter to figure out how I would do this. Are you ready to move to part 3?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so part 3 is now assigned. So essentially she's taken us through, we're going to align the way we want to work, the systems that allow us to work the way we want to work. Then we're going to design and we're going to reinvigorate or, revamp our systems to accomplish the things we want to accomplish. And now essentially we're going to assign those, and we're going to, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, Mike, but we're basically going to try to offload as many of those things as we can to either the system itself in an automated way or to someone else that allows us to do our most valuable work our most valuable activities. And this is where she gets into the idea of chief everything officer, delightfully tiny teams, and kind of unpacks this whole thing. I'm trying to remember the three that she breaks down here. It's what, who, when, and what. Are those the three that she breaks down?
Yeah, who, what, and when in that order.
Yeah, so who, what, and when. So assign. Who do you assign it to? What do you assign? And then when do you assign it to them? So we'll break out again, just like we did before for the last ones. What things stood out to you? I'll start with the delightfully tiny team. You mentioned it before. What I think is really interesting about the Delightfully Tiny team is the fact that these aren't full-time employees in most situations, the way she's describing it. They're, I don't know, would you call them fractional employees? Like they're going to work for you, but they're also going to work for other people. So they're going to get their full-time status by working for a bunch of different people or for a bunch of different projects. And that's okay. Like, be totally fine with that. Like, don't think that they have to be solely dedicated to your world. No, like if they're really good at what they do and they work for you for 6 hours a week, great. Pay them for their 6 hours a week, get the value out of them, and be totally fine with the fact that they're not full-time committed to your business. That was an interesting way to think about this for me, and I liked getting to reframe that idea.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the term fractional employees, and I think that probably applies here. When I left the digital marketing agency, that's actually what I thought I was going to do, was to be a fractional integrator. And I quickly discovered that the business owners that I knew, who I talked to about this, they didn't see it the same way. That they were anchored in that paying by the hour, and so that is a mindset that I think is important. I think it's the ideal way to run a business. You have to view it through the value that you're getting, not the amount of effort that people are putting into it. I think that's kind of the direction the world is going. However, there are a significant number of people who aren't looking at it that way. So just recognize it might be a little bit tricky. But yeah, I think that's the approach. Is I've got this job that needs to be done, and it's a low value activity for me. It's valuable for the business. Otherwise, I might just stop doing this thing altogether. So who is the best person to do this? And how do I put someone in that spot who can do it better than I can, and I don't have to worry about it. If you are anchored in the hourly mindset, you're going to find the cheapest person you can find.
Yep,
and then you haven't really delegated it, because they're just going to keep coming back to you and asking for input and have a million questions, regardless of all the processes and documentation that you make. Like, they're not going to do it up to your standard, and you're always going to be involved in it. So, yeah, I think it's cool that you called that one out. I think it's an important detail that can easily be missed in the conversation here. If you're going to take that approach, what are the key positions that you would hire for? I don't think there's like a formula for that.
I agree.
Maybe the one that's probably the most general is something like an executive assistant for a business owner. But that's where my mind went when I was thinking about that, is like, well, who are the people that I would hire for that kind of stuff? And I do have somebody who's helping me out with the community. So I think, like, in terms of all the action items I'm about to share, that's the area I want to kind of focus a lot of this advice is, okay, with the library, how do we create the systems and the procedures and the documentation for the library and just make that experience as good as it can possibly be. But yeah, it's cool. I like this section a lot. There's a heavy emphasis on delegation here.
Yes.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about from here was from chapter 26 about answering less and how every question lives 3 lives.
Mm-hmm.
The 3 lives of questions are: the first time a question is asked and answered. The second time is when you document the question and response and you add it to your manager manual. The third one is when you add that Q&A to a public-facing resource. I'm sort of going through this right now. So I launched Life HQ, and there's this annoying thing that I missed with the launch, where when you download the file, you unzip the file, it creates like a Life HQ version 1.0.2 folder on your computer. And if you open that folder as the vault, none of the plugins will load, because if you open that folder, there is another folder which includes a README and then the Life HQ vault. And this is a failure on my part. I didn't explain clearly enough that once you unzip that folder, you have to open it and then open the actual Life HQ folder. So I get all these responses from people who are saying, I'm opening this and the content looks great, but it seems like all the plugins are broken. And I was like, well, this is probably what's happening. You're opening the wrong folder, and here's what you actually have to do. So I've created a text expander snippet from that, but I haven't followed through on the other pieces of the lives of this question. And I'm sure if I'm going to dig deeper, there's lots of other things with that. Sort of related to this is the whole idea of calm communication from this section. And she's got a whole bunch of guidelines on pages 263 through 265. I want to actually talk to you about this, because this was one of the things that I championed when I was at the day job. I created the communication expectations for everybody in the organization, because we had a team of like 20 people, and well, this is how we're going to use Slack. This is how we're going to use email. This is, we have these regular meetings. So if you have something that you need to talk about this, add it to the agenda. This was difficult. But the guidelines, I think, are really important. The hardest part for me was when you have people who are higher up in the organization and they've been doing things a certain way, it's hard for them to break those behaviors. So you could document to the whole team and everybody, we're not going, when you post something on Slack, the expectation is that somebody is working and they'll come up for air in a couple of hours and then they'll get back to you. But when the CEO sends a message on Slack, you feel like I need to respond to it right away. So what's been your experience with these communication expectations in your organization? And then do you think something like these expectations that they outlined here could actually be beneficial for your program?
Okay, so the question I have for you, when you're doing it, how many people were on the team, roughly?
I think there were roughly about 20 people on the team, and I did not interact with all of them.
And I think this is where it breaks if you don't have a delightfully tiny team, right? Like if you have a delightfully tiny team, I think this makes perfect sense. You can implement this. It's not that hard to follow. And then it's also not that hard to monitor and correct because the team is so small, right? Like, and you can work this out. When you get above 6, 7, 8 people, people are just going to do the most natural thing. And like, I'm guilty of this too. Like, I despise email. So even if we would establish this thing where it's like, oh, you should send an email for this activity, like, I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to follow the rules because that's how I work. And like, I'm going to try to go, okay, yes, this is the community of practice we established. So therefore that's what I'm going to do. But like, I'm going to forget at some point and I'm going to send you a message on Zoom or Slack, right? And I'm just going to be like, hey, this isn't worth an email, blah, 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 blah. And especially I'm going to do that when I just talked to you in the hallway and you were complaining about how you got 175 emails over the weekend and you're so tired of going through your email. And I was like, I don't want to be that guy. Like, I don't want to add one more to you, but I don't think about it the same way with Zoom or Slack or whatever it is, the chat features of those. So it's like, I was working through this in my head going, how would I redesign the internal structure of our communication system in the School of Science and Engineering at CCU? And I'm like, I'm not sure how I would do that because I would have ways of wanting to do it. And then my colleague across the hall would have a different way. And the dean would have a different way. And it's like, could we actually get to something? I don't know if we could because we're like 14, 15, 20 people, and it's like, there's just too many. There's too many cooks in that kitchen. So that's my take on it.
Well, I tend to think that even in large organizations, you can implement these, but it requires everybody to buy into it. Mm-hmm. Like, there's got to be a real strong champion for creating this company culture where this is how we do things. And then you can't deviate from that. When you make exceptions, it's deadly to the processes that you're trying to create. So I think it's a larger organization. If you're going to try to implement something new, then it becomes harder to steer a bigger ship. Takes more effort. But I think it's worthwhile doing.
I think that champion also needs the authority to actually like push this through. Because if they can be the champion all they want, But if they don't have any authority to hold people accountable to it, then it falls down real fast.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I just to call this one out, this will be real fast. The Fiji test. So chapter 22 is the Fiji test. And what I think is funny is I always will say, if I get hit by a bus, yada yada yada, and like she's like, don't think about it like getting hit by a bus. Think about it if I go on this vacation to Fiji for 4 weeks. We'll think,
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, what a better way to describe that. Like instead of thinking negatively, think positively. Like if I go away for X number of weeks, will the business still run? So that was just a funny one that I thought. A more serious one are these. Well, I want to know what you thought about the 5 T's audit for the different like tasks that you're creating
Yeah.
and like how much you delegate. So 1 was tiny, 2 was tedious, 3 was time consuming, 4 you're terrible at it, and then 5 it was time sensitive. Like, what do you think about those 5 T's?
I think it's pretty brilliant.
Yeah,
I think
me
I've
too.
got a lot of work to do here.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The other thing from that same section talks about different ways to decide kind of how you're going to do things or who's going to do what projects you're going to engage with. There's a section where she talks about a couple different concepts from the aforementioned Dan Sullivan. The impact filters, I've actually used these. These are pretty nice. It's essentially a form that you fill out about a project that you want to engage with, and then it kind of creates the why this is going to be valuable. It's not the only thing that you could use for that, but I think that was there's tools out there that help you figure out what is actually worth doing. And then the other thing, which they mentioned very briefly after that, which there's a whole book written on, is look for who, not how. So as it pertains to a business owner and the things that you're trying to delegate here, there are things that you will want to delegate where if you're analytical, logical planner like me, you'll think, well, I need to create all this documentation and identify all the individual details. Maybe that's the best way to do it, but maybe you're not the best person to do this task anyways. And so who, not how is really thinking about not how the thing needs to get done and you just have to follow these steps and anybody can do this, but who is the best person to do this? Going back to like the unique ability or the zone of genius, when you've got the right people in the right seats, it's better sometimes to be like, okay, you know what? This is your project. You figure out how to make this successful, and I'm going to stay out of the way.
Yep. No, I agree completely.
So stop meddling, I guess, is the takeaway.
Yeah. Stop meddling where you don't belong.
Yeah.
I thought this chapter again was very actionable. I think this chapter stretched me in terms of I found myself saying a couple different times like that's nice but right?
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why I was doing that is because I'm not a solopreneur. I don't have a small team that I'm working with. Like I'm working in a bigger kind of a place where some of this stuff doesn't work as well. Now, one of the things that I would love is like from chapter 25, track every task and assign one owner. Like if we had like a master database for, let's say, the School of Science and Engineering about the things that we're thinking about together and then who owns those, man, that like I think that would be incredibly valuable for our organization. I just don't know if we would do it and actually keep up with it. I worry that we wouldn't keep up with it moving forward.
That is the danger. Yep.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, I think this section was really good too. If we move forward to the conclusion, what were your key takeaways from the conclusion, Mike?
The conclusion. This is kind of an interesting conclusion. I think it really isn't a whole lot. It's just a couple of pages. Mm-hmm. And most of the time in the conclusions, at least in the books we've read recently, it seems like they try to restate everything that they've told you in a very brief form. Just like, don't forget this stuff. And she shares a personal story in the last section here about lifting your focus from the ground, which I think is a really important concept. There really isn't a whole lot of like reminding you, like the last chance, don't forget this sort of a thing. Yep. It's really just sort of an encouragement that you can design a business that thrills you. Freedom can mean a lot of different things, and kind of ends it with a twist on the Thich Nhat Hanh quote that she shared at the beginning, that there is no way to free time. Free time is the way. And I think it's an effective way to wrap up this book. So this book is 280 pages ish.
Yep.
And I don't think it's any longer than it needed to be.
I would agree. I did not read this one thinking like, oh my gosh, this section was so extended and so boring. The one thing I wanted to say about the I agree with you completely. It was much more of a motivational conclusion. Like, go use these tools to develop a system. Go knock it out. So I don't know if you had something else to say, but I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, that was basically it, which is kind of interesting, but also I think the perfect way to end this book.
Yeah, from a structure standpoint, we'll get to this a little bit in style and rating, but just so we haven't mentioned it yet. Essentially, every chapter has like, I don't know, Mike, would you call it an anecdote built into it, where like you get the core principles of the chapter, then she's gonna like run you through this little anecdote, and then she's gonna tell you more and like kind of put a bow on that, and then every chapter also has like a summary afterwards, like hey, here are the highlights of what I just hit. And I like that from a reference standpoint, because there's so much in here that, as Mike will tell you from all of his action items, there's so much in here that you may want to act on if you're running a small business, if you're a solopreneur, if you're doing something. To like go back and reread the whole book doesn't make sense, but you could be like, what chapter was that in? And then just go hit the summary chapters, the chapter summaries, find where you want to go, and then go back into it, which I thought was a good way to use summaries. Didn't cover too much, didn't cover too little, kind of put a nice bow on each chapter. So
yeah, the chapters are the way that they're formulated. There's usually like a personal story at the beginning, and then the application of the principle in a business context. There are frequently these large blue boxes where she'll introduce tangential ideas. They're usually unique, but also complement what she's talking about in the chapter, and there's some really valuable stuff in those. And then there's a box at the end, which is a summary with a couple different sections, including the takeaway, like this is what you should take action on from this section. I think probably about half of my action items come from that, but half of them were just triggered by something small that she said in the chapter itself.
All right, so let's move to action items. I think I'm gonna clear the way. I'm gonna get my 2 out real fast.
Do it.
And then I'm just gonna let you go, right? Like you're just gonna unleash on us. So I had 2 primarily ones coming from this, which actually makes sense considering my stage and where I'm working and the way things are going. Create a document and start it right now to figure out like these SOPs of my job. Like create this document and start adding to it, and writing down these different things for how I actually do my work. Okay, then the next one would be like identify these golden hours, and then have them meet or have them align with the founder time, right? So how do they meet and align with this founder time that I've put into my calendar? And then the harder part of that for me will be actually sticking to that and honoring that and not allowing other things to come in. But that's a whole other world. So those are my 2 action items from this book.
Okay. And then let me see. Let me count these. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different action items for me. The first one is to create a 2-hour founder time calendar block on my calendar. And this is where you are thinking about the big picture stuff in the business. So I want to do this weekly. There is also in the first section a quiz that she put together. There's also a toolkit, which I actually haven't looked at yet, but there's a URL in the book where you can get a list of all the recommended apps and tools and different forms and things like that she mentions. So I think that is actually a pretty valuable bonus for this book. In addition to like explaining how she uses these things, if you can have the templates and things that she uses, that's great. So there is an escape velocity quiz there, which is basically how you can disconnect yourself from the day-to-day operation of your business. I want to take that. I want to start an operating principles document. This is going back to the chapter 1 and the Wi-Fi password for the people who would stay in your apartment, kind of like everything that you would need to know about staying at an Airbnb. I stayed at an Airbnb last week, so I kind of have a picture of what this could look like. But I want to create that inside of Notion for, again, I'm going to start with the library. I want to put together a brand style guide. I sort of have this already with like the colors and the fonts and things like that, but I want to be a little bit more specific with this because I actually have some design tasks that I want to delegate already in mind, and I need the style guide in order to do that. Creating a gifting database. I really like this idea. I want to keep this in Notion. And basically, anytime I have an interaction with somebody in the community or somebody professionally, I want to just be able to add a record to this Notion database. This is the person, and this is the thing that I want to gift to them. And by the end of the year, you've got some cool things that you can do around the holidays. I want to identify the projects that are draining me the most. I think I already have some identified, which isn't real exciting because it means some difficult conversations at some point.
Okay.
I want to set Monday and Friday as no meeting days. And for the most part, I don't have a whole lot of meetings, but every once in a while I get a request, hey, can we chat about this thing? And I want to set firm boundaries around Mondays and Fridays. In the book, she talks about the personalization and like the feedback and stuff like that. And that reminded me of a tool that I had used previously, and I want to start using in my creator business, kind of as a way for people to leave feedback. The tool itself isn't necessarily for feedback, but I think it's called Write Message. And basically you can embed this on your website and people can, click the different options. This is what I'm interested in. And then you can speak directly to the outcomes they're trying to achieve or the things that they are specifically interested in. So if someone has decided, Obsidian just isn't for me, then they can get my newsletters, but there's every mention of Life HQ has been removed because I know it's not appropriate for them. It just makes it a little bit nicer experience for people. So I want to basically have mechanisms like that where I can be more personal and essentially listen more about what people are struggling with and how I can help them. I feel like in terms of stuff that I make, that could be valuable. I also want to create a general feedback survey. I've been looking at some different tools for that, and I think I've figured out which one I want to use. I want to create, for personal use, a shared list of big budget items to review during our family meetings. I recognize that we do tend to talk about this stuff, but I have been telling people when I was, doing some sort of operations consulting, and then when I was with an integrator, as an integrator, it's like, you want to talk about this thing, put it on the agenda. Realizing that in terms of the big budget stuff, that would be really easy to do. Just create the shared list. We look at it real briefly. There's a container for that now, as opposed to I have to remember to bring that thing up. On page 220, she talks about a home assistant, which is somebody who comes and helps with the cleaning, the laundry, meal prep, stuff like that. I know that this is something Rachel has wanted for a very long time. We have not been in a position where we could afford it necessarily, because this is kind of like, in addition to doing the grocery shopping, you're paying for someone to cook the meals and things like that. Yeah. And this is one of those things, well, we'll just figure out how to make it work. But I want to be thinking about how maybe we can even do this on a small scale, just to help her out a little bit with stuff around the house, since she homeschools our 5 kids, and sounds like she will probably be director of our Classical Conversations campus next year. So we got to figure out how to get rid of some things off of her plate.
Yeah.
And then kind of the larger one is making the manager manual. This is going to live inside of Notion, and this is going to, in addition to the operating principles, have all of the procedures, standard operating procedures, all that kind of stuff. So I'm starting to build this out. I have someone that I'm working with on this, but I feel like this is going to take a long time before it is before it's officially done. So I have no idea how many of these I will actually be able to take action on before next recording. There's a good chance that none of these are actually done. Well, the escape velocity quiz, that one will be pretty easy, I think. And the 2-hour founder time calendar blocks, that's not going to take me super long to create those. But a lot of these are just, I recognize this is something that I need to implement into my creator business, and I'm trying to disconnect from the urgency. I look at this list and it's a little bit overwhelming. The plan is to just dump all of these into a list in Obsidian and to continually just kind of chip away at these. Essentially have a big long list of general improvements that I want to make, but there's no specific time frame associated with any of them. And then I just every single week devote a couple of hours to fixing the holes in the systems in the business, and some of this stuff gets taken care of.
Yeah, you addressed the one question I had with these is because these read more like projects, right?
Yeah.
Less like tasks. So therefore I wondered where you were going to put them, and the Obsidian list makes total sense, right? You'll move the subtasks into a task system when it's appropriate to move into there. Well, good. I mean, that's an ambitious set there, Mike. But like looking or listening to you talk about them and looking at the list, it all makes sense, right? Like this book would have pushed this kind of stuff, directly to you, and that makes total sense for me. Okay, let's move on to style and rating. It's my book, so I get to go first. I really like the style of this book. I like the way it was organized. I like the way it was structured, even though it was 3-3-3, like the whole like repeated cyclical structure. I didn't feel like it got in the way. Like I don't feel like it was overly artificial. Her writing style made sense. Her writing style connected with me in terms of the way she intermixed anecdotes and stories with different examples, with different key principles. How she tied back into other works and did that, very thoroughly, I thought, in a way. One of the things that you'll talk about, which you might end up talking about when you do this, is the level of like depth or like how well she hit certain things. Like I thought she did a really good job. Like I did not think there were any that she overly glossed over, or that went like, oh my gosh, like why did we just spend 19 pages talking about like this idea that's loosely connected with everything else? I thought she had a good balance there. So you're hearing me say many, many positive things. I don't know if I have any negatives. Do I have any negatives with this? I don't think I have any negatives with this one. Like this one's good. This is a 5-star book for me if you are in your position. So it's like, help me. Like, I don't know how to rate this, Ren. Like, it's definitely a 5-star book for me. For you. For me, it drops to a 4.5-star book because it's still a really, really good book. It still really made me think critically about a lot of different things and about just general operating procedures and systems. And I got into it for that. But like, I think that if I'm recommending it to other people and I'm saying like, where would I rate this if I were not somebody in your position, Mike? I would probably rate it a 4.5. I would not rate it a 5, just because you may not be able to connect with it as well, through reading the book. So I'm going to give it a 4.5, but I want to be very, very clear. I think it's a 5-star book if somebody's in your context or they're thinking about going into your context.
Nice. So you basically said that I better rate it a 5-star. Make it
like,
a 5-star book.
I'm going to throw this out there, and I don't mind biasing you or whatever. Like, if you don't rate this a 5-star book, like, I'm done, right? Like, I'm just going to pull the plug. I'm not going to hit stop on the recording. I'm not going to send you a file. Like, I'm just done. If this isn't a 5-star book for you, I don't know what a 5-star book is.
All right. Well, I've been blackmailed. No, just kidding. I was going to rate it 5 stars anyways. I think this is really good. Yeah. So it's interesting because it is a business book where she has a framework that does not feel like a system. So a lot of times you read these business books and you got to have these meetings and they got to be this long and this is the agenda. And I actually like some of that stuff. But the problem with those systems books is that they're very prescriptive. Work this throughout your entire organization and that's all you need to do. And that's not the case. You really need to figure out what elements of this am I going to add to my organization. And sometimes there's larger changes that you make structurally, but a lot of times it's just tweaking some things and adding certain elements that provides the big takeaway. So this is very the typical anti-business book because there are the 3 different sections and there are 3 different chapters in each one of those sections, and it's very symmetrical, but there is very little prescription and this is exactly what you need to do. There's lots of examples of this is how I use this in my organization. Even something like the Delightfully Tiny Team, she says that you have to figure out what the size of your Delightfully Tiny Team is.
Yep.
Mine is 3. It could be more than that. So this book does a great job of kind of planting seeds and getting you to think about things, asking some thought-provoking questions to get you going down these paths and decide for yourself what is really important here. I think it is the perfect thing for me personally. Just the stage of business that I'm in. I'm kind of at the point where I am a solopreneur, but I'm growing a little bit and I'm looking to delegate some of this stuff and offload some stuff. And how do I actually do that? So there's lots of stuff in here for me. I think that if you are interested in the idea of entrepreneurship at all, whether that means that you want to start a side hustle or you want to be a full-time independent creator, or you're just interested in how small businesses work, then this is a really good book that you should read. I think there's even personal application in here for someone who is not necessarily wanting to start their own business. Like I mentioned, the home assistant, that was something, very small section, but I could see that being applicable for people who aren't running their own businesses. So I think if you make the principle, you can apply the principles a little bit more generally. You could view your home as a business. You could view your family as a business if you really wanted to, and then the principles would apply. So I think it's a little bit more broadly applicable than I would say it's a little bit more broadly applicable maybe than the framing that you were thinking about it in. And I think that just about everybody who listens to Bookworm would benefit from going through this. Now, there probably are a few people somewhere who you pick this up, you start reading it, and you're like, yeah, this isn't clicking for me, and that's fine. Go ahead and put it down at that point. But I think people should give this one a shot. And then the last thing that I'll say about this is that in the business book world, this is so needed. There are so many books by hustle bros who are going to show you how to kill it. I'm kind of done with the Gary V's and the Alex Hormozzi's. Now, I have to say, like the Alex Hormozzi books, I think there's some really good stuff in those. But again, I'm not going to take the whole system and this is exactly what I do. But like $100 Million Offers, I got a lot out of reading that. So I'm not railing against the stuff that they make necessarily, but just the whole vibe. If you follow Alex Hormozzi online, there is a whole vibe associated with that, which just pushes me. It's grates against it's sandpaper on my soul. It's fingernails on the chalkboard. Every time I see him in his muscle shirt, telling you just got to kill it.
Yeah,
Jocko Willink style. Get tough, basically. Business doesn't have to be that way, and I'm really glad that this book exists, and I wish more people would read it. Specifically, more business owners that have teams. If you read this, your team is going to thank you. So, yeah, I highly recommend this one, and we'll rate it 5 stars.
Alrighty. So it's time to talk about upcoming books. Mike, your book is next. What are we reading next?
Yeah, so I'm going to return the favor and pick a book that you wanted to read, which is Anti-Time Management by Richie Norton. Last episode, you got real excited when I brought this one up. So,
I just did it again. I did a fist pump. I'm pumped about this.
All right,
one.
Cool. Yeah, my wife started reading this one too, and she said that the beginning of the book is the best beginning of any productivity book she's ever read.
Oh, nice.
So high praise, at least initially, for this one. After that, what are we reading?
Awesome. After that, we'll be reading Never Play It Safe by Chase Jarvis. Mike, do you have any gap books for this period of time?
I do. I cranked through actually a very big gap book because we talked about it on the Focus podcast, and that is The Anxious Generation. Have you heard of this book?
I have heard of this book.
Okay.
It's Jonathan Haidt, right?
Yeah, it's basically the dangers of social media.
Okay.
the takeaways from the book were actually pretty encouraging because it's a lot of stuff that we've been doing already as a family. So maybe it's not anything that is, completely original, but there's a lot of research that he has done on the topic. And it was interesting because he mentions in this book that he had actually set out to write a book about how social media was a threat to democracy. And instead, he discovered the larger story was the negative effects that social media was having on kids. So it's a sobering read for sure. And it's not all, this stuff is terrible and just avoid it completely. So I appreciate the tone that he takes towards it and gives a practical, like these are some of the things that we can do. But it's something that I think people don't really think about, and you should.
Yeah, for
If you're
sure.
looking for something that's going to give you some research-based strategies on how to deal with maybe unanticipated negative ramifications of having the social media on your smartphone and being so attached to it all day, every day. This is a good one.
Yeah, I haven't read that one, but I listened to a very long form, like 2.5, 3 hour podcast of Haidt being interviewed, and man, it was really telling. Like he summarizes a decent amount of that book, and it was really telling. So mine is. Well, I have to ask a clarifying question first, and maybe I've asked this before, and if I have, I'm sorry. Do audiobooks count in Gap books?
They can. That's fine.
Okay, because if they can, I mean, I got a ton of Gap books, right? Because I'm like, there's always something in my ears. Sometimes it's podcasts, sometimes it's audiobooks. So the one that I'm gonna plan on listening to is called Deep Discipleship. So JT English is a pastor at a local church near us, and I've just been interested in discipleship from the Christianity perspective. So I want to listen to Deep Discipleship. Kate, my wife, is reading this as well right now, so it'll be fun to talk to her about it and what we're both getting out of it. So.
Cool.
All right, Mike, what do you think? Are
Well,
we ready to close it down?
let's do it. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you specifically to the Bookworm Pro members. We really appreciate you being willing to support the show financially. If you want to become a Bookworm Pro supporter, you can go to patreon.com/bookwormfm. And for $7 a month, you will get a couple of additional feeds. You'll get access to a pro show, which has an extended ad-free version of the show that typically goes out the day before the regular show is live. There's also a bootleg episode, a bootleg feed that the raw audio gets uploaded right after we get done recording. So you get to hear all the mistakes that we make. And there's a 4K wallpaper that I put together, a couple other goodies there. But like I said, if you want to support the show, that is the best way to do it. And you can do so for $7 a month by going to patreon.com/bookwormfm.
Outstanding. So if you're reading along with us, let's put Free Time on the shelf. Pick up Anti-Time Management by Richie Norton, and we'll talk to you next time.